All right, welcome back, everybody. We just finished recording part one with the fabulous wrestling historian of Puerto Rico, Gunslinger. He's been very gracious with his time, and we appreciate it. Um, so we last left off. We were talking about Savio Vega's adventures in the WWF. So let's continue that story on.
All right. Sorry. I like the way he put me over. Fabulous wrestling historian. But yes, thank you for that intro. So yes, last where we left off in the mid '90s, Savio Vega had been picked up by WWF to portray the Quang gimmick. Of course, he would be known later on as Savio Vega, brought in with someone who actually worked the territory of Puerto Rico for a short time and would later come back in not so great a shape, but I'm not going to touch on that right now. Scott Hall, who was at that time Razor Ramon. And
Yep.
of course,
they gave the Quang gimmick had ended, and they brought Savio in as his childhood friend because Scott Hall was Razor Ramon, who's Cuban, and Savio is Puerto Rican, so they know each other because
it was something like
all Spanish people know each other, right? Yeah, that's
somehow.
the gimmick. Yeah, that's the gimmick, right? So
casual racism.
Yeah, so apologies if you hear the thunder in the background. It's raining really hard here. They brought him in as Savio Vega, Caribbean, cool guy, martial arts.
The Puerto Rican sensation. Savio had actually been a very avid practitioner. He's a black belt in, I think, Taekwondo.
Yes, you can tell. You can tell.
Yeah.
I also want to put Savio over because he's one of the first guys. Him and Hakushi came in around the same time who started doing the martial arts kicks. They were the so he kind of entered before Ken Shamrock even came in. He was doing the martial arts style kicks, so gotta give him credit for that.
Yes, sir. Savio, of course, integrated that with TNT gimmick in Puerto Rico. Brought it with Quang a little bit, but then when he had the Savio Vega gimmick, he sort of toned it down, but he still had a bit of that flavor in there, and that was enough to make him a distinct worker in the...
Yeah, his finisher was the spinning heel kick, which for 1995 is very impressive because nowadays guys will do 450 splashes and everything, but back then a spinning heel kick, you didn't see that in American wrestling. Shinya Hashimoto did it all the time in Japan, but most people never even knew who he was. So for Savio Vega to do that as his finisher, it was very innovative.
Well, it was very innovative at the time because you have to remember that the style in Puerto Rico, of course, you had your punches and your kicks, but in the 90s it moved up a little bit. It was a little more technical, and you had a lot more proficiency with, high-flying moves and stuff like that. Because, the young guys were kind of tired of seeing this really old style. They weren't as... they didn't have the luxury anymore of working that easier style like the veterans who had been to WWF before and to all over the territory. So what you had was Savio came in. He had an economy of moves that were set to him by by management, and he did the best he could with them. And of course, the spinning, everybody had a unique kind of finisher. Shawn Michaels had the super kick, and that was, Sweet Chin Music. That was cool. Razor's Edge was basically a glorified power bomb, but from the back of Razor's
crucifix power bomb.
The jackknife power bomb, which it looks a lot, it looks dangerous, and it can be if you don't do it right, but it's a lot safer than what you would imagine.
Yeah.
It's
and of course,
than it looks.
Yeah, and of course, X-Pac I think had like the moonsault, if I recall.
Yeah, and the kicks, I think. Yeah,
and the kicks. So yeah, that was pretty much the most innovative for their time, at least in America.
Yeah.
Now, Savio will continue to work in WWF throughout most of the 90s, up until, I want to say, 98, somewhere around mid-98.
It was 98-ish.
Yeah, 98-ish.
98, yeah.
But we'll get to that part. Meanwhile, over in Puerto Rico, what's going on is the Caribbean Express, Miguel, and Hurricane Castillo are traveling more frequently to Japan. Because Victor has connections over there, he gets over a new promotion. He calls it Wing, and of course he has Wing Kanemura, which would be Kanemura later in FMW, and Matsunaga, who is Mr. Dangerous, the famous steakhouse in
Yeah,
I think it should
yeah.
be in Tokyo.
Everybody, if you're going to Japan and you like
Yeah,
wrestling, don't go to Ribera. Go to Mr. Dangerous. It's better. It's got better food, and
Oh,
it'll
yeah.
actually treat you better. And don't go to Kawada's Ramen House. He treated Brett like a jabroni. So fuck
He
him.
treats anyone like a jabroni. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if Akira Taue went there and Kawada told Taue to fuck off.
Yeah,
but
Kawada's an asshole.
you got to remember, Wada probably still is pretty traumatized from everything that happened in the business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's no excuse to treat somebody like an asshole, especially when they're buying your food. So yeah,
Yeah,
right.
it's like you want to go bankrupt, basically, with that attitude.
Yeah. Anyway, that's an off-topic thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yes, Matsunaga, major star in the Wing promotion, along with Kanemura, who was they were trying to bring him up as the babyface because a lot of people forget this, but outside of the whole deathmatch thing, he had some pretty good athleticism, enough to get him by and be a good worker.
yeah.
He would later come over to Puerto Rico and work a few shows and do the bleeding stuff and whatnot. He would also
He also had an infamous Smoky Mountain wrestling
yeah,
appearance where Kevin Sullivan hit him with a spike and he started gushing out just profusely. It was
yes, it's a reference to another match actually because they tried to do it over in Smoky Mountain, but it didn't work because there wasn't the same kind of weight and booking and impact.
yeah.
So yes, that would be one of those guys. And then another guy that I haven't talked about who is very important to the island and would be very important in the coming next 20 years. A young guy who had been sent to Mexico to work for a little bit and then brought back, and he had gone to Japan as well, and he had worked with pretty much everybody over there for a little bit, just a little bit. A guy by the name of Ray Gonzalez. Now, Ray was a young kid that had been brought into AWF. They had a lot of plans for him, but of course that never panned out when the company died. He had been brought into Capital Sports, now WWC, under a ring name of the Condor as a jobber. Now, once they got rid of the mask, they decided to put him in the junior heavyweight division to test him out. They decided to move him up maybe about a year or two later into the tag teams in '94. And so he teamed up with Rex King and then Ricky Santana and won the tag team titles on multiple occasions. However, by '95, '96, they were already eyeing to make him the world champion as a babyface. And Ray was really sympathetic. A lot of the people really loved him. He was a really great technical athlete. A lot of people here liken him to Ric Flair a little bit later on. But earlier in his career, he's a total different beast. I mean, he is just absolutely the most acrobatic, athletic, gifted person. He just had raw talent out of him. Now, it was in '96, I believe, where they crowned him the world champion, the universal champion, if you will. The universal championship in Puerto Rico is like they created it after they couldn't get the NWA title over here, so they made the Capital Sports Promotion Championship, and then it turned into the WWC Universal Championship. That's where the name comes from. So Ray gets built up to be the next big top babyface, along with Miguel and Hurricane, who were going back and forth, but along with Jesus, get called up in '96, '97 for
Los Boricuas.
For Los Boricuas. Now,
Also, before you continue, Miguelito also had an appearance in WCW
and EC
and ACW with
along
the head on it.
Hurricane, yeah.
Yeah, with also Hurricane. Yeah, you should watch those matches. They're on YouTube. And
Yeah.
I do have to say, Miguelito had a match with Juventud Guerrera where he's obviously the better worker because Juventud Guerrera is an unsafe fuck. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. 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 So let's keep going. I just wanted to shout out Miguelito. He's been around a lot.
What are the odds that Miguelito, like the guy you're just trash talking, Juventud, is like a very avid watcher of our videos, and he sees you say that and he
Well,
unsubscribes?
you know, Hubitude, if you are watching, sir, uh, you need to get a better attitude in wrestling because I've heard stories that Conan has told about you, and you, sir, have a shitty attitude, and you need to stay away from drugs. So,
Well, you never know if it's Conan talking or the weed. So
it might be both, but I do know he broke a poor policewoman's arm in Australia while high on methamphetamine.
yeah,
So
Oh yeah,
yeah.
that was a crazy time.
yeah.
Don't
Anyway,
know. Don't know how much he's chilled out over the years, but it is what it is.
yeah, it is what it is.
All right, let's continue.
All right. So during this period, a lot of guys were being called up to WWF because, well, talent as it is, it tends to reach the top. So Savio gets asked to make a faction of Puerto Ricans, and he decides to call up Hurricane Miguel and two other people on the list. Now, at first, everybody was speculating that it was Ray Gonzalez, but not really, because Ray didn't want to leave the island. He was a major regional star here. He was making enough money that he opened up his own business in his hometown. And he really didn't fit the WWF mold. Nobody would really know who this guy was. But the other guys that were considered were Jesus Estrada, who was the son of Jose Estrada Sr., and his younger brother, Jose Estrada Jr., who would better be known as the Super Medic number 3, but also he would also be known as Rico Suave.
Mm.
Now, I should probably mention Rico right now because otherwise I won't be able to cover him, along with one, maybe two more people that I should cover in the 90s. Or maybe really a couple other people because there's plenty more to talk about than the 90s. So Rico was fat. Sorry, no, yeah, he was fat, but he was wrestling fat. He'd
So
always
like
been that
Shinya
way.
Hashimoto.
Yeah, like Shinya Hashimoto, he's beefy.
Okay, good.
Like he's not super fat like Yokozuna was, where he didn't have a
Or
very good
Samoa
control.
Joe fat.
Or Samoa Joe fat. He was Shinya fat.
Good.
So Rico
Apologies
had
to the spirit of Hashimoto-san.
no. Although Hashimoto's son had also got pretty fat, but I think he dropped the weight. But either way, so Rico had been the Super Medic number 3 in the early 90s, working dark matches with his dad and later tag team matches. So that goes away. They decide to repackage him as this sort of, I guess you could call him like a sort of guardian angel kind of gimmick, but not really. They decide to do the whole NWA shtick because rap is really popular at that time. And they decided to bring him back as Jose Estrada Jr. or Rico Suave. I can't remember if the name was already there, but they decided to bring him in as Rico. He's clad in all black. He's there with a crowbar. He attacks some of the heels. He becomes a pretty big name because his promo skills are second to none at this time. He really comes into his own in the late 90s, early 2000s, where Rico had been going back and forth from Mexico and Japan, and so he was super, super great in the ring, right? So he becomes a heel manager to a lot of the foreigners that are coming in. There's a whole Mexican invasion. He adopts this Mexican accent at one point because he became very popular in Mexico. Everybody liked him. So he is pretty much the top mid-carder position of the company as Jose and Hurricane leave. So he decides to stay, and so Jesus gets picked up for Los Boricuas. But Jose was the big first option because he was just so good. You just couldn't deny it. I mean, he just had such amazing promo skills. He could speak English, he could speak Spanish, and he had enough knowledge of Japan that he could go back and forth and work with Wing or any of the other deathmatch promotions through Victor, of course. Now, the other guy is Jesus, and he also worked as one of the Super Medics, number 3, because it was interchangeable. But then over the years, he was just sort of in the mid card. He wasn't as good on the mic as his brother, but in general, he was a much valued worker in the company. The other couple of guys in the mid card were a guy by the name of La Ley, which in Spanish means the law, and his gimmick was that he was a cop. And he was a babyface for the longest time under a mask, and then without it, and then over the years he just faded away, which is a shame because his gimmick was pretty cool. What was the other guy? I completely forgot this guy. There was another guy by the name of Black Boy later on in the 90s. He would go on to be the Dominican Diamond. He turned heel after betraying the babyface locker room for the heel one and becoming a traitor. This would prompt a feud where he would adopt the name of Dominican Boy, and of course he would lose the mask, and after that he left for the other company, but we'll get to that saga later. The other couple of really not noteworthy names are just junior heavyweight guys and foreigners that never came in, but there's two that are very important, actually. One of them is Glamour Boy Shane, who would become a very popular foreign star during the 2000s and the late 90s after repackaging himself for the other company. We'll get to that too. But the other one would be Val Venus, Sean Morley.
Hello, ladies.
Hello, ladies.
Right.
The man with the big schlong in the island. So yes, Sean Morley was part of the Glamour Boy tag team. He came in along with Shane to try and make a name for himself. He would leave for Mexico and become El Steel over there. He would meet Lita. They would both go over to WWF. And Val Venus, for the rest of his life, would remember his time with the island and be very fond of it. I actually asked him one time on Twitter, like if he remembered any, Shane or whatever, and said, "Yeah, I remember that time fondly. I wish I could go back, but I'm kind of sort of retired from wrestling right now."
He's more focused on his weed and crypto
Yeah,
stuff and
yeah.
stuff like that. And also,
Being wild.
speaking of Val Venus, there's videos of Val Venus in Puerto Rico for IWA Puerto Rico, and he speaks fluent Spanish. He's very good at it. He speaks fluently.
Yeah,
I
if I
mean,
recall,
you almost
This,
think you would think he was born on that island. He speaks it fluently.
if I recall, he
he's,
even did excursions in Mexico too, right?
As El
yes,
Steel, yeah.
he was El Steel. He was this big giant robot monster thing.
Yeah, stupid gimmick.
um, yeah,
Spanish
ridiculous.
is
But
so good.
they took it off of him and they just ran with okay, he's El Steel, the fucking giant foreign guy. And Lita was there too with him. In addition to that, there was also some other worthy names of mentioning. One very hilarious name. There was a I guess it was very brief tag team called the Havoc Players. If you don't know who the Havoc Players is, one of them is some jobber guy nobody knows of. But the other guy is a guy that is a legend in the Indies and would be a legend in TNA. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've never seen Christopher Daniels with a bullet and a Shawn Michaels glasses and the earrings, please look up the Havoc Players on YouTube under WWC.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this man was working like he was Shawn Michaels. Like he lived and breathed the gimmick. It looked ridiculous. But he would be, he would come back again in the late 90s to work for IWA when he was starting out. Am I forgetting anybody? Well, yeah, actually, Chicky Star around the 90s was sort of aimless. A lot of the top stars were sort of aimless. Johnny Rivera was slowing down, and Vader number 3 was going away. Vader number 2 had already retired. Hercules had left for Canada. Carlos was, he was pretty much winding down. He was getting ready to, get Carlito ready, and Eddie. Stacy Colon, which is his daughter, was also not in the picture yet, but she would be later on. And a lot of the stars that had made up the 90s and had brought the Puerto Rican style to a little more of a 90s style, they were gone. they were starting to all go to WWF, or they were all retiring if they were older, or a lot of the undercard guys were getting pushed upwards, like Black Boy. But there was one that was still holding down the fort, other than Ray Gonzalez. And that was a man who was so popular that they had to put him with Dutch Mantel so that he would rub off on him. And that man is a man who had started out under a hood. He migrated over here to Puerto Rico from the Dominican Republic. Man who should be a legend because, god damn, he just incited every goddamn riot in every town he was in. Man by the name of, yes, a man by the name of El Bronco. Now,
El
Bronco.
Bronco.
Yeah, has some very humble beginnings. He is Dominican by birth. He was born there, raised there. He starts to go to a gym to build his physique, trying to be an athlete. But he's always been a wrestling fan, and he'd always wanted to try it out. So he discovered in the gym that there were a lot of wrestlers training there in the back, and decided to approach one of the managers and ask, who do I have to see? Oh, that's me, yeah. And so that's how he starts his career off. He goes off, starts in the promotions over there, asks permission from another wrestler to use the El Bronco name, and so he becomes the masked character of El Bronco. Moves over to Puerto Rico. Nobody had ever seen somebody with that big a physique before. He wasn't the tallest guy ever. He was about 5'11", but he wasn't he wasn't anybody small for, by any chance. Down here we've always seen these really beefy kind of guys in wrestling, but never like Bronco, where he was like super jacked in his life, or throughout his life. Still to this day he is. Last time I saw him, and this man would be a baby face. Yeah.
Like saw him like in person.
Yes, in person he's still jacked, and I think he's like in his 50s now,
Good
which is amazing.
God.
Yeah. So yes, he's got a fantastic physique.
Bro.
So they pretty much start booking him with Invader #1, and they make a pretty good tag team, admittedly. Pretty good babyface tag team throughout the mid-90s until, oh yes, and of course the Texas Hangman would feud with them, and sadly that was a tag team that should have come in earlier, but sadly was
Bobby
not
Jagger.
there.
That's not Bobby Jaggers.
Bobby Jagger.
That's the Kansas Jayhawk you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Also, speaking of the Texas Hangman, they're great. I love them. But as a Texan, I do have to take umbrage with the fact that none of them are from Texas. One of them is from Germany, and the other's from Wisconsin. But
it's
it
okay.
is.
There's a Houston in Germany, I bet. I mean, there's a Paris in Texas. There's a Rome in Georgia.
That okay. That I guess it works like that. All right, yeah. Awesome tag team.
There's a Florida and Puerto Rico.
That's even better.
Well, you want to know something funny? Just a funny history tidbit. The governor of Puerto Rico, Ponce de Leon, discovered Florida. That's
that's right.
So there's that connection.
Yeah, and we got like one of the towns named after him. So go figure.
Yep.
Ponce de Leon.
Yeah, so the Hangman feuded with them, and that was a pretty big feud for them, pretty big money feud for them. So in the mid-90s, Bronco turns heel. He loses the mask because he really didn't need it after that, and he becomes an absolute heel, just absolutely the most racist thing on this planet. Some of the best promo work you'll ever see in Spanish. Unfortunately, it's not very well known. This guy just basically carried the territory as a heel through the mid-90s up until the late 90s when Ray would turn heel, and that would kick off a pretty big period for WWC. Of course, he didn't quite get the Mr. Ratings character just yet. He was at the cusp of it, but not yet. So that would pretty much be the entire locker room, or at least the people that mattered in WWC at that time. Dutch Mantel would be around as a manager in the late 90s. Chicky would sort of be a little aimless, but in general, he was still doing his thing. We would have a few older stars come back, but then they would leave, and they'd just be there for the payday. Invader #1's brother, who had Milo Huertas Gonzalez, which was Invader #4. he would come back in and do some work and then just leave. Of course, by the late 90s, he really was never a big star. He was a great wrestler, though. He was probably the fastest of the four invaders. And then finally, I think by the late 90s, the Mexican invasion had happened. And I think this one's a noteworthy topic because they brought in a lot of great wrestlers, too. They brought in Tejano Sr., they brought in the Villanos. I think Villano 4 was the one that shows up. Uh, Pierre Roth became a very big star here because at that time Pierre Roth was in CMLL as the big, tough Mexican heel, and then he came back and he said like, "No, I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm going to make a Puerto Rican army, and you're all, I'm going to make a Caribbean army or whatever, and you're all going to be, Puerto Rico's bitches." Feuded with La Parca for the non-existent Caribbean championship that I only found out a few years ago was a thing in Mexico. And apparently La Parca still has it or something. I don't know. And he feuded with Ray Gonzalez towards the end when the Mexican, when the Aztec invasion, quote unquote, was sort of waning down. It was a really good relationship between CMLL and WWC. It was very lucrative. At this time, I remember I started watching it as a kid and being absolutely in love with Pierre Roth's mask. I think that was the first introduction to lucha from Mexico that I had, and I was just stricken by it. I mean, I just loved it, and all the colorful and all the little guys, the little midgets that would come in and wrestle.
Did they? I
Yeah.
have a question. Since we're talking about the minis, did they ever bring the legendary Kimonito to the island?
Unfortunately, not. We brought in. Yeah.
The way they treat Kimonito at CMLL, like all the Rudos just kick him and throw him around. Like I like if the crowd might have started doing that. Like not even the wrestlers might have started. They that's a shame that Kimonito.
Oh man. I think Kimonito, the older one. I think he was like the manager for Tinieblas. And I don't know, he turned into Kimonito or whatever. I can't remember if it's like a different people in the mask or whatever, but Kimonito, the first introduction I had as a kid was when he got kicked off the ring apron and just flipped around.
Yeah, that was hilarious. That's a funny clip.
That is just wow.
Yeah, they do not treat the minis with respect in Mexico.
Well, they do. They just don't. They treat them like any other wrestler, and they forget sometimes. Like, hey, these guys are smaller. I mean, they some of them take the hit, but these guys are smaller. They're gonna fucking shoot out, flying. So
yeah.
Oh
Anyway,
yeah. Now you just
So,
brought
yeah.
me back to that famous GIF of Kimonito.
exactly.
yes.
And of course, we also had some other mini stars. We also had Mini Pirate Morgan. We had Mini Masquerita Sagrada.
Yep.
The Mini Espectrito. Mini Spectro.
Yep.
I think we had Mini La Parca at one point.
Yeah.
And
La Parquita.
yeah, and the actual La Parca at one point. And I think we also had another.
Park, but I refuse to call him that.
What, LA Park?
Yeah.
I refuse to call him that. Fuck that.
Yeah, no, I understand what happened the other day with La Parca, but he's still the original La Parca to a lot of people south of the border.
Yeah.
So go figure. It is what it is. Plus, the AAA one was never that good.
Yeah.
So,
R.I.P. him though. So yeah.
Yeah, RIP to him. Unfortunately. So that was pretty much 90s and WWC in the 20th century, at least. But that was pretty much 90s WWC. And towards the late 90s, finally in 99, that would be the year that Ray Gonzalez kind of started to figure out, like, oh, I'm Mr. Ratings Ray Gonzalez. I'm the guy that draws. And he started using that in his promos and his name, and he would start wearing these fancy suits. And somewhere around 99, you started to see Carlito in sort of dark matches, apparently, and being
What was
tested.
it? What did he start out as a cameraman though, or something like that?
Yeah, yes, kayfabe wise, but he had been training for a while.
Yeah. Carly Colon.
Yeah.
My first name. Wait, his real name is Carly.
No, that's
his
just
real
his
name.
nickname. Yes,
Yeah.
Carly's like his nickname.
My first introduction to Carlito came in WWE
Yeah, where most
with
people saw him.
with,
Right.
with the afro and the apple and the I spit in the face of people who don't want to be cool and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah. I should address that. That was such a shock to us because Carlito was built up as he was built up as a babyface, really wholesome and like sportsmanship, like his dad, because he didn't want to see his son as the bad guy. Because Carlos has a huge ego. I mean, we'll get to again. There's a really important part of Capital towards the end of the 2000s that we have to touch on.
All
That's
right.
very like it's a really famous incident from the island, but Carlos I'll let you all know Carlos has a huge ego about
Yeah,
how he's
yeah,
portrayed.
we could tell.
Been watching
Definitely.
classic tapes. Me,
But
Boris.
I guess I should cover at least that part of the Capital Sports in the 90s before I get to IWA.
Yep.
So Ray pretty much figures out like, oh, I can make the fucking I can make Mr. Ratings my gimmick, like he's finally embracing the Ric Flair-ness of his persona. And that would lead up in 2000 to become. He started the Millennium Family, and they discovered Thunder and Lightning, but that's for the 2000s episode. So at this time in the shadows, in 97, 98, I want to say, Victor Quinones is sort of disappointed in Japan over there in 97, 98. He had gone back to work for F&W for a little bit, but he'd sort of fallen out of love with them. Onita didn't
What?
really want to there.
Well, the reason why is because
Wing failed.
Wing failed, and the IWA, while it existed, it became more of like a indie fed. Like they weren't able to run Kawasaki Stadium, and also
Yes.
there was a management change after 1995. Onita had retired, and Shoshi Arai, the announcer, had taken over, and they went in a totally different direction. No, there were still death matches. Don't get me wrong. There were still death matches. There were still barbed wire matches and stuff like that. But they were not as focused on death matches, and they were building up Hayabusa, which is great. Rest in peace, Hayabusa, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And Onita really wasn't a presence. He would come back, and then he would kind of leave and, do his New Japan run and all that kind of shit.
Well, the management had changed in the mid 90s after he left, but you have to remember too, he came back and he was driving everybody nuts, and he was asked to leave in I think 98, was it?
Maybe, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, he was asked to leave by what was his name? Araki, was it? Or Arai?
Shoshi Arai.
He was the president at the time, and then Onita wanted some of the control back. He got some of it, but everybody said like, we're tired of Onita's shit. The fans have turned on him. You could see that actually in the last big FMW show they had, and one of the, what was it, Osaka or whatever, and so people said screw this.
Yeah, because people were pissed that Onita broke his retirement. He's like, oh shit, you're breaking your retirement? Fuck you, we're not coming to see you.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, but also the Hayabusa fans were kind of pissed because he was undermining Hayabusa to some degree.
Yeah.
So he pretty much was asked to, take the title, here's the money, go away. Like, it's over.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Meanwhile, Quinones, going back to that, Quinones had tried IWA Japan and he tried Wing. Wing obviously came in before. With IWA Japan, there was a point where I think somebody had turned to him. I think it was Miguel. And he asked him, you think maybe some of this would work in Puerto Rico? And he said, maybe I think it would. And that's when the impetus for IWA Puerto Rico came along and where the name came from. And that's when Victor pretty much had the light bulb moment, like, okay, I've got all these connections. I've worked for WWF as a, as their guy in Japan and the foreign, market. Why the hell, shouldn't I go to Puerto Rico and make my own territory again, and compete with Carlos? Carlos isn't doing anything right now, And he had, by the way, Victor was very instrumental to getting a lot of the foreign stars because he had a lot of connections in Japan and Mexico.
Oh, yes. Let's also mention that before we forget that he
Yeah,
is very influential to Japanese talent, especially two names that when he died gave very nice tributes to him were Tajiri and Taka Michinoku. And the reason why is because Tajiri was trained in the IWA Japan dojo,
yes,
and
sir.
he got brought in to Puerto Rico when he was very young, and nobody knew who he was, and he got brought in there before he went to ECW, right? And Taka, started the Michinoku Pro, not in Japan, but in Puerto Rico, kind of similar to how Ultimo Dragon started Toryumon in Mexico, not in Japan. So
What? Whoa. Okay.
Oh yeah. With Michinoku Pro, they had started back in the '90s, but Taka.
not Michinoku Pro. I'm sorry. Kai and Tai Dojo. My
Oh,
mistake.
yeah.
Kai and Tai Dojo started in Puerto Rico.
Yes, actually, yes, and he trained a couple of Puerto Rican guys. I think some of them trained with him. One of them was Tommy Diablo, who he's now retired. He's a lawyer now, but he's absolutely fantastic. I think if you want somebody that kind of wrestles like Chris Jericho, I've always said he's like our island's Chris Jericho. There you go, Tommy Diablo. Go watch his matches.
Yeah.
And then the other guy was Anarchy, who was more underneath guy. He was one of the junior heavyweights. He had a party gimmick, and so that was why he was called Anarchy. But he was really good, high flyer. Won a couple of tag team titles and stuff like that, but really wasn't a big name. But he was always remembered for that kind of goofy gimmick. And of course, because he was Victor's friend and practically lived with him and helped him out a lot.
Yeah.
So Michinoku, of course, he had those connections, brought Taka and Sasuke over to WWF, helped bridge that gap in between them. Obviously, Sasuke wanted more money, wanted more of a role. WWF didn't really care about Sasuke; they just wanted the light heavyweight division. So they said, "We'll keep Michinoku for a lot less, and he could be the ace of that division." And of course, that ended up being really good for him because he made a lot of money, but he also got to be a star in Kai and Tai. And they were very evil. Yes.
I would call Kai and Tai stars, but yeah, they were memorable for sure.
They were definitely memorable.
Also, want to give a shout out to Wally Yamaguchi, one of the writers, who started a lot of promotions actually in Japan. He helped start FMW, Universal Lucha Libre, which became Michinoku Pro. He helped start Michinoku Pro, and he came over in the WWF as Wally Yamaguchi, and we all know the infamous angle with his wife, and yeah. So shout out to Wally Yamaguchi, who is sadly passed away.
And Val Venus and a katana.
Yes.
You all say it's infamous, but that was some of the best stuff I'd ever seen on TV in my life.
It makes me laugh, but as a fan of Japanese pro wrestling and seeing what these guys could do, I just thought, oh god,
Oh, you think
these
that's
guys
bad?
could be.
Wait till you see their oddities feud.
Well, you have to remember that there's a better, sometimes there's a more story-driven way to do things, and that's what American wrestling is.
I definitely during that time, I'll just say this: I prefer the way WCW handled Japanese talent over the way WWF had, but
definitely.
Neither is wrong though, in my opinion. So yeah. Anyway, just want to give a shout out to Wally Yamaguchi, who's influential in all this stuff. So yeah, let's continue.
For sure, and of course, shout out to the entire Kai and Tai guys. Like you guys were really instrumental.
Yep.
Really instrumental in that early IWA period, especially in the middle of 2000 and 2001. I'll never forget some of the Japanese guys that came over here. Minoru Fujita, he's like a bigger indie veteran over there. He's worked all over from Noah to Big Japan and 01. He was green as goose shit. And of course, High 69. They also came here.
Yeah, Hiroki. Big tag team.
Oh, if I recall, sorry for interrupting, but if I recall, speaking of Japanese and excursion in Puerto Rico, if I recall, New Japan's Togi Makabe had an excursion in Puerto Rico, right?
Yes, he too. Yeah, and Hiro Saito was his name. He was Captain New Japan.
God.
Captain fucking New Japan.
Yeah,
And
he
imagine
was.
getting the short end of the strip on the short end of the stick. It's like, okay, what Japan wrestler are we getting? Captain New Japan. Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ay,
Anyway,
Remember,
yeah.
remember when he was like Bone Soldier or whatever?
Oh yeah.
he sucks. He's terrible.
Yeah, he
Um.
was terrible.
Anyway,
Um,
let's keep going on the
Sorry
IWA
for
train.
the derail
all
there,
right,
but
so
that was a thing.
yeah, so I think he also had Tiger Mask
Somebody
4.
say
But
IWA Japan.
No, Rasta. We're talking about IWA Puerto Rico, and
We're having a big history lesson about Puerto Rican wrestling right now.
if I would ask people, please don't interrupt. We're trying to keep it as concise as possible. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah. Anyway,
so he had all those connections, and of course he helped with the light heavyweight division. Later on in '98, we get the first IWA show. This is really big because it's basically just a WWF show, but it's got a bunch of people from outside the WWF crossing over. You've got guys from underneath and on top, guys like The Brood, Edge, Christian. I think the Hardys might have come at one point. And of course, my man Gangrel, he was a bit of a fixture over there in the early to late, not early, but mid to late 90s as
yes, Vampire Warrior.
giant or vampire warrior, whatever you want to call him. He comes into Puerto Rico and works a couple of times, but doesn't stay for the later period of IWA. That is reserved for Val Venus, DDP, and Taka Michinoku. That show pretty much, they got a lot of mileage out of some of those shows. I mean, they were airing at midnight in Telemundo, and at this time, Telemundo really didn't want anything to do with them. They had a really bad slot at midnight. They had this kind of cheesy presentation with like two co-hosts introducing it. It was like they just didn't understand it. So in '99, they tried to revamp it again. They're still in the midnight slot, but now they've got Hugo. It's the Attitude Era, logo with the WWF. They're still a territory of the WWF.
Yeah, their
Development.
development of territory. Think
Yeah.
OVW, Deep South, stuff like that.
Yes, sir. And Hugo's there. He would exit the company in 2000, right? Yeah, somewhere around 2000. But in '99, he's still going there. He has some disagreements with Jamaica, but he's still helping out with a lot of the Mexican talent. And he helps bring in Hijo del Santo. He brings in Antifaz, Zorro,
Ray Bucanero.
Ray Bucanero, Super Crazy, who would later on be a mainstay of IWA for a little bit. Victor brings in Tajiri because this is around the time that Super Crazy and Tajiri are having those killer matches in HCW. So he just decides, well, I'm going to book them in dark matches or do some other stuff with them. And then I'm going to book them against each other later. Let me see if I remember some of the noteworthy stars that started popping up. Now, Victor, when he arrived, had started taking up talent to get the IWA roster, the mainstay roster, ready. Because he knew Hugo was probably going to win because Hugo wants more control than what he can actually manage. Victor ends up recruiting Fidel Sierra. He ends up finding a very young and very confused about what his gimmick and what his role should be, Apollo. That's Apollo from TNA. And I don't know if anybody knows, but he's a giant 6'2", jacked as all hell Puerto Rican guy. He would have been the next big thing to come out of this island. He was absolutely a star, but he had a lot of problems around himself, mainly a case with some spousal abuse in the 2000s that resulted in him going to jail, and some steroid abuse problems that really, really messed him with his chances with WWE.
Yeah, that Ricky Banderas pretty much took his spot as the next guy, right? After that happened.
Well, Ricky was seen as, okay, we've got someone with just absolute talent, but they really weren't sure what to do with him at first because they were
Yeah.
really looking for Apollo to be the big next star. And they were right. He was going to be the next big star. But Ricky ended up connecting with the crowd a little bit later on. He wasn't the 100% babyface, but um, Ricky would pretty much be, at first, the Patriot Ricky Banderas. And the name Ricky, by the way, is Ricky Martin and Antonio Banderas. There you
Yeah,
go. That's where the
yeah, definitely. I could have guessed that a mile away.
yeah.
Do that shit.
I think the name might be owned by somebody on the island. I think it might have been either IWA that registered it without him knowing, so he can't
Yeah.
use it.
So he has to use El Macias or whatever.
Yeah, he had to use El Macias, but that is also owned by AAA, so he's now the name that they gave him in CMLL. So Ricky and him tag team as the Patriots or whatever. They're the new generation. The second generation has arrived, or has begun, as they call it in the history books down here, the fictional ones, anyways. And so Apollo and Ricky become a tag team, but Apollo, I think, turns heel, or no, it was Ricky actually, Ricky, and he ends up joining a faction that would be later known as the Star Corporation. What is the Star Corporation? Well, Dutch had come in by early 2000s to start booking for IWA. They'd start running house shows. It was really down. They had stopped doing WWF style stuff and bringing in all these names because their schedule was conflicting and they weren't going to be there all the time. But they were getting guys from ECW, WCW dropouts, occasionally a Mexican or two, occasionally a Japanese guy or two. And then eventually they started getting a little bit more WWF guys, like maybe three, like DDP and
Oh,
Takamichi Val Venus,
yeah.
Kane was the big one.
Yeah. Okay. Also, I want to, since you brought up Kane, I want to say, Victor Quinones brought in a lot during the WWF developmental territory days. They brought in a lot of top talent, like the Undertaker and the Rock. The Rock and the Undertaker came to that island and sold out like a 50,000
Road
seat
Dogg.
Road Dogg, stuff like that. The Undertaker came down there like 3 times. And I know
Right.
why he came down there because, the Savio connection, they're boys, they're tight. So they're probably like, yeah, let me do you a favor. And Savio, I heard on like a shoot interview, said, I was trying my hardest to get Steve Austin to come down here. Because, the Steve Austin feud with Savio is pretty legendary. It just never worked out. But I guarantee you, if Steve Austin came down there, they could have went to every damn town and sold it out.
Oh yeah. With how big the Attitude Era was down here and how big Austin and Rock was, I mean, they sold out the town that they did the Rock and Kane versus the Dudley Boys in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a legendary moment for us because that's the Rock. Like, that's not just any wrestler. That's Rock.
That's the Rock. Yeah. So
That's the
just
fucking
that's
Rock.
that. Just wanted to add that in. Yes. Continue.
But yeah, we almost got Austin. The idea was that we were going to have a big match. It was going to be him as referee or him versus Savio one last time. And we were going to sell out the goddamn arena. But, whatever. It didn't happen, unfortunately. It could still be happening someday. I don't know if Austin
Maybe,
really wants to.
yeah. Maybe Steve really wants to do it. He could do it. I guess. Yeah.
Who knows? Batshit, 50, 60-year-old Austin still does one last match. Whatever. So
Fabio can't even-
they had a lot of connections. Unfortunately, they never got Yokozuna again because he passed on. The Godwins never came here because they were pretty much done with wrestling. And Papa
they were
Shango,
kinda shit.
yeah, Papa Shango was he came here a few times against Undertaker, and I think Mankind also came, but that was a one-off thing. Taker actually had like a staph infection grow from a match with Mankind from a week before that, where he had cut himself on a pipe. It was the Boiler Room match. And apparently it grew to the size of a goddamn bowling ball, and they had to get it out in the back room and then rush him out to the hospital after the match.
Yeah.
Props to Taker because he just did 5 minutes with Mankind and him in the match, but that was great. Props to him for going out there even in a lot of pain.
Yeah, I guarantee you it's because him and Savio are like close. Like it's just like
Yeah,
that's Taker's boy right there.
yeah.
I think Taker would do anything for Savio pretty
Yeah,
much.
that BSK click. I remember Savio actually flew to Undertaker's last match at Survivor Series,
Yeah,
and
they're skin
yeah,
tight, bro.
yeah, he flew over there and they had a booth up in the really expensive booth seats with like catering everything for them, just for like them to uh, get together with the BSK guys and just talk.
Yeah,
They even have like a little chair for Yokozuna and just had like a beer there for the guy, in memory
yeah,
of him.
yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Paul Bearer, and
Yeah,
Fuji, who aren't there anymore.
yeah. Unfortunately, Paul. Oh God, that's one of the guys I miss. Paul was
Yeah.
Paul was funny. There's actually a match with where he's like with the Kane and the Dudley Boys match, right?
Uh huh.
So I mean, the entire match is just messing around, and they managed to do, I think, on Victor, they did the rock bottom on him, and you could see Paul Bear do the rock bottom on Victor. It's one of the best house show moments ever. I
That's
mean,
that's amazing.
yeah, it's just one of the greatest moments in wrestling ever. It's just like it's just like what do you call it when your friends are hanging out and it's just like an absolute riot? It's
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. But
It's a you had to be there moment.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
We're saying yeah a lot, so we're going to turn that into a gimmick.
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, totally.
So the 2000s roll by. Now Ricky has been pushed into the Star Corporation. Dutch has booked this brand new team around Chicky Star and Victor the Bodyguard, who's back in action with Chicky after I think pretty much a decade of hiatus. Because Victor was, by the way, he was a babyface at this time, but he was switching around, and yeah. So Victor comes into IWA. He's a very large enforcer for Chicky, who is pretty much the chicken shit heel, quote unquote. But Star Corporation is led by mostly Dutch Mantel at first, and that creates friction between them. And of course, that also creates friction between the pseudo Boricuas, the unofficial Boricua Ricky Banderas, uh, who is teaming up with Hurricane Castillo and Miguel Perez, who splits off from that faction, and that
Man,
becomes a two-man. Yeah,
man is a
yeah. Go ahead.
oh my bad. Man, Ricky is a honorary Boricua.
No, he's
Right,
actually.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
He's an honorary Boricua, quote unquote, and the idea was that they were going to have Miguel split off. That ended in Miguel becoming this sort of Sandman meets Austin, drunkard meets Puerto Rican. It's kind of like our Puerto Rican take on the Sandman in Austin, and he
Wow.
became super popular. Like he became mega over with the fans. Like they loved him. They called him El Malcriado. That character is the disrespectful one, I guess, is what you could call it in English, but it's not the correct translation. Miguel ends up becoming basically this ass kicking machine from dusk to dawn. There's an angle where they have to write him out for a little bit because apparently Miguel had some issues with his body in the early 2000s where he had to take some time off. So they write this angle where he starts doing drugs, goes nuts, and then goes off into like the sunset for a little bit. He'll come back later when Savio as a heel gets him back on the drugs. IWA writing.
Only in Puerto Rico, folks.
How in
It's a
the
pretty funny.
hell?
It's a pretty funny angle. It's a bit out of
That's
context.
some
I'll
Oh
explain.
dear.
that's
I'll
some
explain
goofy
later.
shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll explain later. But I'll cover these like first 2 years because it's already pretty late. So I'll continue this. I guess we can do this in the weekend, right?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Oh shit,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So Miguel leaves for a little bit to rest. Hurricane Castillo continues on with the Star Corporation. That faction collapses in and on itself when Chicky and Victor decide to double cross his. Well, at that time, I guess they were already the I want to say either the brother or the brother-in-law of Victor. I'm not sure exactly how the family lineage of that works, but they were, they were well known together. They were family, and they had kids, and they are all wrestlers, by the way, too.
Mhm.
So yeah, the Rodriguez family dynasty here is pretty extensive. So they all end up betraying Victor and everybody. Angel Rodriguez, I think, is the guy's name, or no, or something like that. Ends up, being neutral. Havana, who was actually one of the first female kind of valet, stars here. That's going to be a trend in IWA a lot because they're bringing in a lot of American style stuff. She's one of those who just goes neutral, ends up with Cheeky and Victor, and that pretty much solidifies the Star Corporation as a tag team exclusively. That other faction ends up, going away and turning into the Corporation. I'll get to that. Who the big heel on that is in a minute. But Dutch ends up taking a role as a booker. He ends up just going away for a little bit from the screen, at least, and ends up in the back booking with Luke Williams, who was helping out at that time, who was being paid by Victor Quinones. And Luke Williams, for those of you that don't know, he's one of the Bushwhackers.
Yep, one of the sheep herders.
Yeah, one of the sheep herders. I mentioned the Bushwhackers because he's a little bit well known for that. So
Yeah.
So we end up with a backstage team that's pretty. They're pretty damn good at their job. But there's one guy at this time who had gotten into the company through the magazine, because this time IWA is making so much money that they can afford to make like a magazine. They've got like an internet forum. I mean, this is a whole company. There's actually they still got their offices over there in I forget if it's over up north of the Capitol, where you can still see the flames painted on top of the building with the IWA logo and everything. It's ridiculous. The building's still here. So the company decides to hire a guy by the name of Moody Jack Melendez is his nickname, but he's Jack Melendez. Moody Jack starts off in the magazine. He was a big fan. He never dreamed of doing the in-ring stuff, but he worked his way through the system to become head booker. Now, he replaced Dutch, which is, pretty big shoes to fill, and he pretty much learned under Dutch. He learned under Savio. He learned under everybody that there was, but he took a more Vince Russo Crash TV meets more story-driven angles kind of approach. He is fantastic still to this day. You can tell all his writing style, his booking style to this day. Even when he was doing the league, and he's doing Lawway today because he has some pay disputes and falling out with Savio. And he also had a massive falling out with Capital when he was doing that, and they were doing great ratings at first, and then Carlos didn't want to do anything, but we'll get to that. And Moody Jack is the man behind a lot of the success, booking-wise, of IWA, along with Victor's financing. Now we get to 2001, Christmas and PR. That's the big end of the year show. That's when we all take a break from wrestling to plan for the next year. And Savio, who had been on screen, and really off screen too, friends with Shane, Glamour Shane. Glamour Shane had been repackaged as this, he's a Canadian American / Puerto Rican patriot, but he's 100% Puerto Rican. He loves you all. And we still do. Like, that man lived in my hometown here, and he's a legend. So Shane is feuding with the Star Corporation, or what's left of it, and that Star Corporation is getting fined every time that Ricky Banderas is hitting people with chairs, but Shane's coming to the defense of Ricky. And Shane's kind of, Savio in the vignettes is sort of tired of having to defend Ricky and also Shane. So he decides, okay, fine. He turns heel on Shane. And he kicks him out of nowhere. Does the best sidekick he's ever done in his goddamn life. And the crowd goes nuts. Like, oh my God, how could he have done this? this is one of the most legendary moments in Puerto Rican wrestling. Everybody remembers this from IWA. It's called the Great Betrayal. That's how fucking legendary it is. They have the word the Great Betrayal on it. You know, the Great. You don't get the Great because of just anything. This is a year or two in the making where you establish that Sabio was Shane's best friend. And here's Sabio kicking him all because, you know, he was tired of putting up with this. He was tired of defending him against Stark Corporation, who were, you know, they had Ricky and they were tired of Ricky. And that's when the magic happens because, see, the Stark Corporation joins up with Sabio. They lined up and just formed the straight up corporation. That's when, you know, Ricky gets betrayed. He gets bloodied up and messed up a bit later on. But here, he's going to come out of the crowd and he's going to do the whole Messiah pose, and then he's going to come back and change and do whatever. He's going to have his match, and then he's going to get hit with a chair or whatever. Shane gets all bloodied up. He gets messed up. And that's when the start of Los Hermanos en Dolor, the Brothers in Pain, starts, which is an angle where Ricky and Shane teamed up as this sort of dark kind of, we've been betrayed, we are brothers in blood now. You know what I mean?
It's like almost like a,
What?
we, almost like a, we, we've been fucked for the last time. All we have is each other.
Exactly. You know, they're like a lone wolf kind of tag team. It's a very occasional tag team too, because they're a great mix. But Ricky always had to turn heel at some point. Shane couldn't. You know, Shane was the just ultimate babyface of the company. That's why a lot of people, when they see Ricky, they think, oh, he must have been the top draw. He was one of the top draws. He was maybe number 2, but Shane was there. And Shane was the guy that was just like, he was the established guy. I mean, he was one of the golden geese, you know? One of the golden eggs. Yeah.
I don't know what the term for it would be in Spanish, but he was, I I guess the term for it would be el mejor, but he was the guy.
Yeah, he was the best. He was El Mejor. He was Shane, the glamour boy. Apollo was also there. He ended up being babyface, but ended up turning heel in 2002 to get ready for the big corporation year angle. The ratings for this were gold. You couldn't go. I mean, you couldn't miss it. You had newspaper ads. You had TV ads in the middle of the soap operas. You had billboards. You had IWA going to your graduation and raising money for your graduation. You had it all, dudes. My dudes, like this period was so hot for wrestling. They were in skit shows. Uh, they were showing up in interview shows in the late night circuit. They were, I mean, where were they? You know, I look back and it's just insanity. You could still find most of this stuff on YouTube if you look hard enough. Um, and really, that's the early 2000s in a nutshell. I'll stop here in order to keep it for the weekend because we still have so much to cover. So many people to talk about, so many people from the States, so many people. Well, the Japanese and the Mexicans stop being a little bit less relevant, but the American guys will start being just as relevant, if not more, as time goes
Yeah.
by.
Yeah.
Now,
What?
now,
Oh, you go, Zach.
Would any of you have any further questioning?
I was
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
ask
if anybody-
about, like, say, the Cologne sons, Primo and Carlos Jr., or otherwise known as Carlito.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about them or not.
Right, I'll give them a brief plug-in at what they're doing at this time. So, Carly starts off as a kayfabe cameraman. He pretty much graduated high school, went into college. He was doing college, I think, at this time during his wrestling stuff. But he was pretty rough around the edges at first, but he had a natural talent with him, thanks to his father and a lot of discipline and training. Eddie, on the other hand, was a machine. Like, he wrestled guys that were beyond his level from an early age. Eddie got to work with Juventud. He got to work with Ray Mysterio Jr. He got to work with, I think, a guy by the name of Justin Sane. He got to work with a few other Mexicans, if I'm forgetting. He got to work with, he got to work with guys who were a lot bigger than him. I think Jason the Terrible did like a brief thing in IWA. Sorry, not IWA, but WWC for for a short bit, the Puerto Rican version. Uh, so he was from the get go. He was just absolutely. I mean, they just put they put the title on him at one point when Carly left, and if you look at him in 2000 versus or 2001 versus 2003 4 when Carlito came back and he was doing the whole Afro gimmick, man, it is night and day. They are both completely different beasts. Um, Carlito looks a lot more jacked. He's working a lot, more heavyweight, more American style, more heel, more, selling for the baby face. And Eddie's doing these insane acrobatic moves that, I mean, he really was his dad's son. He really was the acrobat, that moniker of the acrobat of Puerto Rico. Well, that's what he got. And what they're doing right now is in 2000 to 2002 is Carly's feuding with Ray Gonzalez and the Millennium family. They're doing some pretty strong business at this moment. I remember because I used to go to the shows a lot. Capital was one of my, it was one of the first things I ever watched as a kid. I was also watching IWA, but it was, it was like sort of just foreign to me because I was so used to the Capital style. And so Carlito was feuding at that time, but then somewhere around 2001, Thunder and Lightning come into the playing field, and that changes everything because nobody had seen a tag team like Thunder and Lightning in their life, not since the Road Warriors. These two were jacked as all shit. They had Kane outfits at first, but then a WWE cease and desist letter demanded that they take off the blue Kane outfits and replace them for the Lightning Bolt outfits they're known for today.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
Yeah, so they got the red outfits, which is like one of the most iconic looks. Although later on they get the black outfits and the white ones, and that'd be pretty iconic too. And so they started feuding with Ray, who went to, in kayfabe form, went to the Dominican Republic where Carly was vacationing to ask him for help trying to beat Thunder and Lightning because these guys were absolute wrecking machines. And it culminated in a series of tag team matches across the island where Thunder and Lightning would pretty much, they trade wins back and forth until the tag team's departure in around, I want to say, late 2001, early 2002, where they got paid majorly by IWA to come work for them. And they became just major household names over there. I mean, they won the tag team titles every single time. There was a whole year where you couldn't get those things off their waist. Carlito left, and then Ray stayed with the company, but that company went downhill really fast. I mean, they lost so many people.
Yeah. What one more thing I want to ask before we let you go, because you've been extremely gracious with your time, and we really appreciate it.
And I got one more small thing.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me ask my question about that. I was watching a shoot interview with one of the foreign wrestlers, the Americans who came down there named Brent Dow. He said during this time in the 2000s, he's working for WWC, and they were at war with IWA, right? He said IWA was kicking their ass, and it sounds like they were kicking their ass. Yeah. He said Carlos and Victor Jovica were not paying people very good. He said they would take half of people's pay as like expenses or something. Is that one of the reasons IWA was just so dominant at this point, because they were paying people better and they weren't snaking people out of pay? Or is that one of the reasons why IWA was so successful, other than the great booking by Moody Jack and Dutch Mantel and all them?
Look, I'm going to get to this in the next installment, the next time we talk. And
okay, yeah.
But I'll give you this short answer. Victor and Carlos still to this day owe so many people so much money that they're pretty much, I mean, they can't hire half of the people that they used to have in 2008.
That's pretty bad.
Carlos today, the first time we saw him after the whole COVID lockdown stuff, we found out he had Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. Now, that had him leave for retirement, and now Victor and Ray are the ones running the things. They still owe people money. They can't run that company for shit without the money that the TV station gives them in order to make the show. Beyond that, the money that was owed to those wrestlers still has not been paid. They take them half of the money because they can't afford to pay you. There have been times where I've seen and heard a lot of stories from a lot of the guys who jumped from IWA when that died to WWC who said, Victor promised me X amount of money and he owes me about $10,000. Never
Oof.
worked for him. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so bad over there. It's not even funny. That's what really prompted a lot of the guys when IWA came back in the late 2010s to jump over to IWA. Now, they're not making any money over there because the island really, there's really no money at this moment because everything's really fucked from both the recession
and Hurricane Maria
and the hurricane, the post-hurricane kind of recovery shit, and the fact that COVID hit us so hard.
Yeah.
And of course, the other problem is that we've got about, I want to say, 4 companies running at once. You've got CWA, you've got Lawe, LAWE, whatever you want to call it, WWC, and IWA. And WWC almost died, but then Lawe couldn't screw them over. Orlando couldn't screw over everybody else. So
yeah, it really doesn't make sense for an island that's it has 3 million people for 4 companies to be running such a small island. But they do them. You can do what you want, I guess. But yeah,
you can run 2. I give this company crap, but CWA has always been a place for the younger guys to show off their stuff, even if it's not a very big company or it never has been. It's never been popular in its life. It's just a small indie. Now, they still run, but, it's smaller compared to the big 4. To the other big 3 companies. Lawe was a recent thing, and I think it's probably going to fold in on itself if it doesn't do some strong business in the coming years. Capital will always be there because they keep funneling money into it from either the TV or from their own pockets. And then finally, IWA will be there as long as Savio Vega, Miguel, and everybody else draws a breath. Because they love what they do. That company is always going to be the strongest out of everybody else. And, everybody else managed to die off after the hurricane, with the exception of Capital, which sort of went into hiatus. But, that it's going to be there.
well, anyway.
Now,
Zach, you could ask your last question. They were going to let the fabulous gunslinger go do what he wants to do.
Sure.
Now my last question is, I'm currently on the YouTube channel for WWC Super Super Estrellas de Lucha Libre. If I want to get into WWC now, is there YouTube a good way to do it?
Yes, I could answer. I could answer this. Not to cut you off, sorry, but all the major Puerto Rican wrestling promotions post their shows on YouTube in full. IWA, WWC, LAWE. I haven't seen CWA, but maybe they do. I don't know. I didn't even remember they existed.
They do Facebook streams, but largely don't have a YouTube channel anymore. They did have a TV show on 11 o'clock in Channel 11 back then, or back in a year back, but I don't know if it's still there either. Now, if you really want to catch that, I mean, you'd have to go to Facebook and check if they do the live stream still. But in general, they don't. They're kind of on the lower totem pole. But yes, those are some good places to check out if you want to see at least a company that used to be around and was originally trying to do some new stuff. The World Wrestling League channel has a sort of comprehensive list of what's happened from 2014 to, I want to say, after the hurricane in 2019, pre-lockdowns. There's a whole set of matches from all the guys that are currently working the island in the big 4 companies.
Yeah. We will definitely talk about La Liga or WWL later, but yeah. So thank you for the information. Thank you for enlightening us, and thank you for giving us your time, Gunslinger. We really appreciate it, and we hope you have a good time on the server. So thank you, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for bestowing
thanks,
your
man.
knowledge on us mere gringo mortals.
Also, before we go, please support Puerto Rican wrestling. Go watch IWA, WWC, WOL. It's all free on YouTube. It's in Spanish, but you know what? I've always said this: wrestling is a universal language. You don't need to understand Spanish or Japanese to understand what goes on in the ring. So
Exactly.
so please go support that. And I would everybody, let's bring the scene back up. So yeah. Anyway, so thank you, and let's have a good night. All right. So
Good night, folks.
good night.